and congratulations. Okay, so now I'm going to swing back to Anand. So, as I mentioned last week, Anand is visiting us via Hangout. I got to know Anand originally through when he was in grad school at UC Berkeley. He and I were two early movers in the crowdsourcing research space. He was at UC Berkeley working in actually a slightly different area, but then started hanging out with Bjorn Hartman. And I was at MIT working on some early crowdsourcing stuff. And he did a whole bunch of really fun projects, including projects that would start to sort of recursively decompose tasks into smaller tasks that the crowd could take on automatically, as well as a project that I believe tried to start predicting how long a task would take based on different parameters and so on. And eventually, he got really interested. I'll stop, and you can describe yourself in a second. In trying to build a better platform, which is the main reason that we're talking to him today. He created what was originally called MobileWorks. MobileWorks, for me, had a couple of distinguishing features. One was that it really had a social mission, and that it was trying to basically provide jobs and opportunities to people, especially in developing regions such as India. And second, from a research side, was that they had a very interesting model wherein they started promoting their own workers to become reviewers. So they created a kind of layered hierarchy within their crowd so that they could scale up and out and mentor. Through all of this, he became a Y Combinator alumnus, and his current startup, I believe, is the one that's founded by Andreessen Horowitz. So that's my super brief intro. And I guess I would say, is there anything else you wanted that I missed about you?
No, I think that's a terrific introduction. And thanks so much, Michael.
Cool.
Well, great. So how should we discuss this? I'm happy to tell you a little bit about how we thought about platform design in the early days, or to walk you through the story as a whole, or we can talk about some of the problems that you and your team have thought about so far, and how they might draw lessons from what we tried to do in generalized platform creation.
Yeah, I guess what I'm most interested in is just sort of hearing a little bit about the, I guess first sort of at a high level, the path you took when you decided to start creating a marketplace, that like the decisions you made and things like good decisions and bad decisions.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I think anyone who works with crowdsourcing marketplaces, especially folks who started back in the time when, Michael, you and I started doing this, were struck by the ridiculous complexity and difficulty of needing to, that was required to get up and running on these systems. Amazon did not make it easy to interface with their workforce on every level, from actually building plugins to talk to the API, all the way up to the difficulty and complexity of finding good workers, recruiting good workers, retaining good workers, checking work, designing tasks. There were lots of opportunities for improvement. And I think this often, it's when you see a system that's this bad as an engineer or as a researcher, you're immediately drawn to the question how you can do better. And I think part of the real appeal for us was we as researchers felt Amazon is a huge company. They've got a big market. We can definitely do better. They're just making bad design decisions. So the way that we thought about it, we had a few basic ideas. And I'll tell you some of them, which ones turned out to be right, which ones turned out to be wrong. So the structure of Mechanical Turk was fundamentally unfair to workers. From what we could see, we did some large-scale surveys on Turkers, asked them what they thought of the system, what they thought of the results, what they thought of their relationship with the crowd, and with the company. We got pretty consistent results. People didn't like the pay, they felt like they were marginalized, and so on. They didn't like the fact that requesters had all the power, and they thought Amazon didn't care. Great. We knew what requesters wanted, we thought, because we had been working with Mechanical Turk for some time as researchers and academics. We were actually wrong, but we thought that we understood some of the challenges that requesters faced, which were quality, reliability, ease of access, speed of results, and so on. Okay, so what we did was, our original model here was, we thought we would build an API-first system that would let developers post tasks. We would build our own backend that would serve up tasks in a fixed structure to workers, so there was a very limited opportunity for task design. You couldn't embed raw HTML in an arbitrary format. You couldn't present arbitrary open-ended tasks. Every task was a question or with an answer. You'd post it in via REST. You'd get results out via REST. We had our own API design that we thought was far superior and cleaner. For our workforce, we went out and recruited a workforce directly ourselves. People were very, very happy to leave Amazon Mechanical Turk and come work for us, up until the point when they got to our system and didn't find much work. So I think that the primary considerations we thought about this from a design perspective, and we designed almost entirely around the workforce. We spent a little bit of time thinking about the requesters and designing for the requesters. And this was actually, I think this is a pretty common trend you see when you're talking to academics who are looking at crowd work. We spend a lot of time thinking about the worker because we like workers, we want to do the right thing, we want to do right by them. There's a lot more of them, and they're more interesting than requesters in many ways. But in fact, a marketplace that's designed around the needs of workers as opposed to designed around the needs of requesters will face one consistent problem, which is what we found out pretty quickly, which is that you can attract all the workers you want, but your marketplace, your platform will not get anywhere if there's no work in it. And in fact, there's no shortage of workers out there on the web or in the world. Even if you treat them really, really well, the people you need to win over in order to make a crowdsourcing platform work are requesters. And that's what started us on the path of exploration that really reshaped our thinking when we designed the system to try and scale. So that's a little initial overview. If I can comment on the journey of our ideas and our thinking, we went from having an API with a very good backend for workers that we thought would work pretty well to a model where we let people who were not developers send us work using some web interfaces that we set up, to a model where we ended up setting up projects for customers. So they would send us projects, we would decompose them and distribute them out to workers, to one where we ended up doing away with a lot of the decomposition complexity ourselves, introducing management layers in the crowd that would let the crowd self-organize a bit, encouraging people not to use APIs at all and just to send in work via email or via non-technical channels. And all of this thinking was around the idea that we could get more and more people to start sending us work, as opposed to sending us, as opposed to trying to attract more and more workers, because we never had a problem with attracting workers. Until ultimately we decided to offer what became a more or less verticalized approach, which was to allow requesters to send us work in very specific, well-known domains, one of which was sales and marketing support, which turned out to be a really good use case for the crowd that we had because it was very easily accessible by crowd workers. There was a huge amount of it. We could pay our workers, in keeping with the social mission we had, above market wages, and we could basically provide more or less unlimited work for them to do, which is what set us on the growth path to change the name of the company, to restrict the kinds of work requesters could give us to just sales and marketing work, and ultimately to go on the growth path that we are today. So Lead Genius, same company as MobileWorks, but our original infrastructure is all there. The crowd machine that's running behind the scenes is still the same crowd machine that we started out with when we built those APIs 4 years ago. The difference is that we've really solved the requester side of the problem completely, as far as we're concerned, by restricting what people can give us. And we're no longer a generalized crowdsourcing platform. We are just a platform for people who want to push in sales and marketing tasks, which is great because we don't need to work with developers. We don't even need to work with crowd specialists, and our customers don't necessarily need to know that they're using the crowd. Um, on the other hand, we have, I think we've left some stuff on the table here for other groups because we didn't succeed in building a generalized crowdsourcing platform that replaced Mechanical Turk. Um, but I think that there's maybe some good takeaways there and some lessons to learn when you guys think about how to design this platform for yourselves.
So one thing that I've been sort of consistently telling people, I don't think I really had to tell this group, but especially outside when I tell colleagues about what we're doing, there's this sort of assumption of like, oh, I'll give you tasks, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so what do you have? And it's the kind of thing where it's like, well, I do a ton of work. I run 10 surveys a week, and
Right.
I'm like, this is not enough. So I'm wondering, like, do you have advice to
Yeah.
to groups about how you go about essentially what's business development in this case, where you're trying to get what I feel like is you need like almost industrial people who have just tons of data to label or something like this.
Yeah. Yeah, so let me tell you exactly how we thought about this, because we made this exact same mistake when we started MobileWorks. In fact, our initial idea was this. We said, we're going to scrape all the work on Mechanical Turk, because there's so much of it, and then we're going to put that work into our system, and our workers will be extremely content. We'll have enough to totally replace Mechanical Turk. We didn't know that Mechanical Turk was actually small potatoes back in 2010. Total marketplace volume there, according to Panos Iporotis' mTurk tracker, was just a few $1 million total over the course of a year, which meant that you weren't going to be able to support too many workers. Maybe, I think we figured 1,000 total, even at India fair wages. So we got a lot of attention in the early days, similarly from researchers who wanted to give us research projects. Research projects require a broad pool of people to come in and contribute small amounts to give you statistical significance. That's great for requesters because they benefit from having a large liquid marketplace. It is not good for workers because if a worker shows up and participates in a research study for 5 minutes once a week, you need 60 people like that to give statistical significance to your requester. Suddenly you need a lot of people who are pushing you work all the time to make this work. So our ideas about who is doing work on Mechanical Turk in the research community suffer from the perception bias of knowing other researchers. In reality, the majority of work that's being done on crowdsourcing systems, the vast overwhelming majority, is not being done by us as a research community. It's being done by big companies. Mechanical Turk is dominated by companies like Microsoft, Google, in some cases, folks who are doing AI-based annotation. Some of this work has moved away from Mechanical Turk and now has gone into other crowdsourcing platforms that are private. For example, Microsoft has their own internal system now that uses multiple vendors, so does Google, of which Mechanical Turk is a small portion. So there are a few approaches you can take here if you want to lock down that side of the market. The first is to not think about researchers because as much as we love researchers because we are researchers, they don't have much work. And if you build a system and you're trying to build a system that actually has a meaningful amount of work, enough to keep people occupied, you've got to look at those top requesters on the platform and build something that they will use. The good news is those big requesters, there's a small number of them, and you can find out who they are pretty easily. I think Panos' tracker still lists the top requesters that are public on Mechanical Turk. Amazon's API is easy enough to reproduce that you could copy literally the same API, contact the crowdsourcing people who are in charge of those, and say, hey, you're pushing in, say, $1 million of work a year. We've built the same API. It's identical on a different system. And instead of charging you 10%, we'll only charge you 5%. Why don't you try it out and see if the quality is the same? And if there's no difference, you guys will save a bunch of money. And that's an argument that I think would be compelling to a large company because they've already sunk the cost in getting the results out. And in fact, for them, they don't care about worker issues. It's too big an operation for that to even come up. They probably don't even care about the nasty architecture. Because it's a business initiative and the engineering work is a sunk cost. Um, they care about the fact that Amazon looks reliable from the outside and that they're doing business with a reputable entity. But they might be amenable to trying something out if it was easy to make the switch, meaning no redesign of their system, no redesign of tasks, just changing one line in their code to post to a different endpoint. And they might be amenable to uh, the cost-saving argument, assuming that it works out well. And you don't have to charge 5%. You could also just say, well, you'll need to do less work with fewer workers because our workers are better or our system is better designed, which is the argument that we made. The other option, of course, is to go to a very, very narrow vertical, where you don't need to deal with the requesters of work already having systems that they can try and use, which is what we did. And that has let us, support a fairly large community on our side.
And so I want to pick up on one question or one point you mentioned, which is that people trust Amazon. It's a known name. So when you were trying to lure people away, presumably that's an uphill battle to a certain extent. What did you deploy, like we're a Berkeley startup kind of name recognition, or what did you end up doing?
Yeah, so you can try and get these conversations, and they'll certainly talk to you if you say you're a technology company. But consider that you're person X at Microsoft, you're VP of crowdsourcing or VP of engineering, and you have an initiative that you have to get Siri's, Cortana's voice recognition up to a certain level of quality by date X. And you've got to spend $1 million on a vendor. You'll probably try out 3 or 4 vendors, but you won't lose your job betting on Amazon. You might try out a Berkeley startup, but I've seen some of these conversations with companies that are less technically literate than maybe these big tech companies, because Xerox and other groups do put in a healthy amount of work themselves on these systems. And those guys really want to go with somebody who is relatively reliable, and they do a pretty consistent job of trying out the vendors and then going with Amazon at the end.
So what approach would you recommend to starting to grow? My inclination for us was to start with a relatively small workforce and basically never grow the workforce larger than we have the work to support. But I'm curious about your experience and anything you would recommend.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. We started out with I'll tell you my philosophy on this. We started out with lots of workers, and we had to keep figuring out ways that we could keep them busy when there wasn't work around for them to do, so that they could wait for the work when the work actually showed up. Ultimately, what we did was we decided to just stick with fewer workers, and that it would be better to have fewer workers who were better employed and more employed than to have lots of workers who didn't have a lot of stuff to do. And if you start with that model, if you get maybe 10 workers who stick with you and work 40 hours a week, I think there's a pretty good case that these guys will stay with you and succeed. And it's much easier to succeed on giving 10 people 40 hours a week of work than trying to keep 1,000 people occupied. And there's a lot of tasks that 10 people who are working 40 hours a week can do.
Interesting. I want to make sure I don't dominate this conversation, so feel free to pop up others. Otherwise, I'm taking questions in the Slack channel, and I can echo them.
I have a quick question.
Neil, then Saif. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Anand. So one question is how do you differentiate between tasks which are, let's say, micro tasks, where complex tasks like designing a song or writing a song, then composing it and doing it via crowd. Do you think this model is also applicable and sustainable in that context?
Yeah, so the question you're asking is whether or not we can use complex work in a model like this as opposed to just doing micro work. So we've tried doing both using our system. We started out doing just micro tasks, then we moved to doing macro tasks, and now we're back to doing micro.
Oops. I think we lost him.
Yeah. I can get back to him.
It's okay. I'm still here.
Okay.
Just had to switch video off for a moment. Okay, great. So the question was whether we could do micro work or macro work, as I call it, in this model. So we started out with micro work because that's what Mechanical Turk did. Then when the market was changing and we wanted to try and differentiate, we moved to macro work, and now we've come back to micro work. So you can do both. I'll tell you the great thing about this model, and Michael, Rajan, you can also give me your thoughts. I think this whole space has been moving upstream, and okay, this data annotation work that's been prevalent in discussions is going away. It was dominated by people who wanted to build annotation for machine learning systems. A lot of the more interesting work, a lot of the more engaging work, a lot of the work where you can get better success in employing workers in a crowd platform is the upstream work like writing, design, drawing, coding, translation, things that are not necessarily micro tasks. And the reason is that that category of work, you don't have to sell to developers or to niche researchers. You can sell that work to anybody. You can find lots of people who need design work or coding work or writing work. You don't need to do BD to just the niche community of people who are already thinking about Amazon and other systems. So I think that's a great way to go if you go that way. Macro work will definitely work well in systems like this, and we've done it. Actually, it happens. You can read one of our recent papers about this, but we still process a large number of writing tasks in our system because somebody set up a tool that basically gave us exclusive access to a whole bunch of writing tasks.
Is this the Wish paper you're referring to?
That's the WIST paper, yeah. I mean, I don't know if we go into it, but there's a commercial tool that backs this up. Actually, I think Raj and I was pitching this as an idea to you guys. One way that you guys could get task volume on this is to put out one of your own tools and make that and distribute it to end users. Don't do business development in the traditional sense where you go out and get a guy who's going to make a deal with Microsoft. It's a compelling software application that end users can use. Something like Foundry or something like even Soylent, right? Where you can get a large user base and where all the tasks will go into your platform. That's a great way to get a critical mass because now you don't have to solve a business relationship problem at all.
Great.
Yeah.
Why don't we pop over to Saif's question?
Oh, thanks. Okay, so let's say that you had to design just 2 features on your platform that would ensure you brought in fairness for workers, and then 2 features that brought in, let's say, fairness for requesters. What would they be?
Okay, well, considered fair, and then I'll tell you what I think you would do in general. So the two systems we introduced that I think for hourly wage, and we looked at World Bank of what cost of living was like, communities that we operated in, and we pegged the amount of money that are at our, and today we just pay them by the hour for every hour they log. There are incentive issues for sure. People are not incentivized to work fast, but they are incentivized to work correctly. And that guarantees some base level of fairness for our workers in that they're not underpaid. That's a pretty strong motivator. The second we made was to introduce unexpected positive. Workers have had to go through other channels to organize in Turk and in Odesk. In our system, organization and collaboration is at the forefront. Means that they are consistently in chat with each other. They're organized into teams and substructures. They have managers inside the workforce, and the managers represent them. There are some labor dynamic issues for sure. There's manager-worker sort of conflicts of interest at times, but there is a channel for escalating disputes and in a formal manner for us to review those disputes. And they have a very strong sense of loyalty because they think that we have skin in the game. Okay, fairness for requesters. two things that we've looked at. And I think fairness is an odd way to think about it because requesters' interests are not exactly around fairness. They're around efficacy and quality. The first thing that we did was we guaranteed the quality, even if it meant a loss for us. We said, you're not going to have to worry about it. You're not even going to have to review tasks if you don't want to. If you do, you reject the work, we eat the cost. So that put the onus on us to get the quality right, not on the customer. And I think we got that right. That was the right decision for sure, because it meant customers didn't have to think about whether they were taking advantage of a worker or not taking advantage of a worker. They just had to know that we were that they were working for us and that we would take care of it.
And
I really think that was the right decision for us to make. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going to pop on a question from the Slack channel. This is Angela is asking about reputation, like the reputation on the platform. Like, do you track worker and/or requester reputation? And if so, sort of what have your do's and don'ts been?
Okay, great. So back when we were a generalized crowdsourcing platform, we did track we tracked. We didn't track reputation in a formal sense, but we tracked it in an informal sense. In the early days, we didn't have that many customers, and you will see a lot of scammy-looking requesters show up for tasks. We would wait until workers complained and then just turn off those requesters because it wasn't worth the headache for us. Users are also quasi-illegal, so we just didn't want those in there. And we didn't have to worry about reputation because the number of requests was relatively small. Today, we don't track reputation for requesters because we control the requesters, more or less. We have a direct sales team right now that's bringing in tasks on an individual basis. When we were a generalized platform, we had to worry more about that. But today, we apply filtration, and we basically whitelist requesters when we bring them into our system. And for sales and marketing tasks, there's not too many. I mean, there are some, but there's not too many that can be truly malicious or abusive. Now, on the worker side, we do maintain quality. We do it in a very, very manual way. So this is one of the things that you guys could do as a choice because you guys are so, if you guys start out with a small workforce, we have our managers review every one of our workers every week. They look at the output. They look at the output relative to, they generate reports basically using our system that show them the output relative to everybody else in their system. Are they above market, below market, or on track with the rest of the market in terms of productivity? And if they disagree, they can push that back down to the requester themselves, and or excuse me, to the worker themselves, and make them redo work, or ultimately kick them out. And we have a 3 strikes model where people just get bumped out. So there's no sophisticated recommendation system or sophisticated multi-worker reputation tracking because that's overkill. I mean, if you have good management in place, your reviewers will tell you who is good and who's not. And they'll say, I don't want to work with that person because they're going to bring my numbers down. Oh, that's important. Our workers' numbers, our managers' numbers are linked to their workers' numbers. So if they review somebody badly, or if somebody does bad work and they approve it, then they look bad, and eventually they will get booted out of our system.
Right. Open floor. Someone want to ask a question? Maybe we have time for maybe a couple more. I want to be respectful of this time.
I had one if nobody else has another. So your company is all about locating hard-to-find information about businesses, decision makers. What do you feel are some of the key signals that we should look at, for instance, for requesters and then for workers?
Signals like, again, concerning what?
So let's say you want to ensure that you have let's say again with fairness because that's probably a lot your expertise, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, so I think fairness is perhaps it's a good concern, but you should bake fairness into the structure of the architecture of your system. You shouldn't try and select or reject requesters or workers based on the choice of fairness, in my opinion. The overwhelming factor that's going to dictate the dynamics of your marketplace or your platform is the volume and amount of work that is coming through, as well as the type of work. And you will have to make choices at the early stages about how you guarantee fairness in that system. There's only a few basic questions that you first, if the requester thinks work was done wrong and the worker thinks the work was done right, how do you resolve that question? Is it something that escalates back to the requester? Is it something that you deal with, or is it something that the worker deals with? The second one is, how do you set fair prices in your marketplace? If the requester wants to pay price X and the worker thinks they should be earning price Y, is that something you let the marketplace decide? Is that something that you will decide as an imposition in your system? Or is it something that will be different in different situations? But those are architectural choices. I don't think you necessarily need to think about this in the Amazon Mechanical Turk open marketplace model unless you really are consciously making a choice that that's the model you want to explore. I think you may be better off saying, like we did, let's start out with a question of what is a fair system. Let's make that system fair, and then let's go and find work that fits that model, as opposed to saying, let's open this up to everybody who wants to give us work, and then try and decide on the fly who is fair and who is not acting fair. Because then you have to pick between good and bad actors.
And Anand, how are you guys dealing with the pricing issue? Do you negotiate with the requester, or whatever requesters say, you just pass it on to the workers?
The pricing issue?
Mm-hmm.
We actually, the way we solve it now is great, which is that we tell people the price they have to pay.
Okay.
Which is, and in fact, it's actually, the model is like this. It works in general, not just for sales and marketing tasks, because we were doing it in the early days. Somebody sends us a small quantity of work. We push that to the crowd. We measure how long that work takes, accounting for the review, the quality control, any rework, and then we quote the price back to the requester. And that lets us guarantee that workers are paid fairly. And it also lets us guarantee that requesters are going to pay that price. And I think that's a great model. Like, it actually seems to work really well. And it lets us control prices on both sides.
So I have had experience of using MobileWorks when it was really young.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was using the APIs, and the first model was that there was X dollars per hit, and that, like, there was not a very variable
Yep.
system.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened was that sometimes the hit size was larger, like, for example, 10 images per hit or like 20 images per hit. So there was no way to, I think, track that. But later on, like, as and when I started using it more, the pricing model changed, and it changed to, I think, per hour basis.
Yep.
Or something like that. Yeah. So, and then suddenly we posted, and it showed up like more money. So I emailed Anand asking, like, what happened, and so he told that, well, now we are doing it per hour basis because the size of hits are very variable, so it's very hard to, like, manage all of that. And
Yep.
I think that proved to be very effective, even from our point of view, because that helped us design the hits more effectively versus just trying to optimize on the work getting done and the pricing part. So that was very useful at that time.
Yeah, I think that's it was. I'm glad to hear that it was actually the right choice for the requester too, because that's not quite what we were thinking about. We were concerned with the worker then, but I think it does turn out to be fairer for the requester as well. So yeah, I guess this is the takeaway here for your team is